We got a great one for you today. We're sitting and talking with Gabriel Rotello.
Gabriel is a very talented artist and writer that played music in the CBGBs Lower East Side scene in New York City back in the 70s. He just released an awesome book called the CBGB Conspiracy, so go check it out. In this episode, we discussed what it was like being there in the 70s in New York City during this amazing artistic time. We spoke about the current state of the music industry and so much more. You guys are going to love this one. We can't wait for you to see it. Let's check it out. Okay, everybody get into character. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Music Maniacs with Sight After Dark, the podcast where we talk about music and we just so happen to be maniacs about it. This is a very special episode. We've had many musicians on the podcast before, but this is the first time we've had a musician, an author, a filmmaker, somebody that does as many things as you do, and we are very excited to speak with you about everything you've done in the past, about the book that's just came out, and wherever the conversation may go. So everybody, make a round of applause for Gabriel Rotello.
Yeah! Hello, Sifa and Dan.
Hello, thank you again. We're so excited for this. If for anyone listening at home that may not know you or be aware of you, would you like to introduce yourself? Is there anything else that you would like the people to know before we get into it?
Well, I am currently a TV producer and a writer, but I did have a long career as a musician in New York in the 70s and 80s, and then a career as a journalist for a while after that. So I've done a bunch of different things. I guess you'd say I have a short attention span. And here I am.
And here we are today.
And I just recently moved from Los Angeles back to the East Coast.
Oh,
so
welcome back.
I'm enjoying
Welcome
the wonderful winter that we're having here.
Oh, yeah. Isn't it great?
Yeah.
When I moved here from Florida, that was the thing I was really most excited for is winters. That's really what I was really going for.
That's what you wanted, really?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. No sarcasm at all. No sarcasm at all.
All right. Well, Gabriel's got a book out talking about, it's pretty much a murder mystery, and it's also combined with the peak rock punk era in New York City. Gabriel, if you didn't know, Dan and I always say that 1977 was a peak year for rock and roll. We absolutely love that year. So it's right in line that you've come into our world, we've met each other, and we get to pretty much talk about 1977. So can you tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah. So it's called the CBGB Conspiracy, and it is a murder mystery that takes place in New York on the downtown scene in 1977, which was the year of the Son of Sam serial killer. It was the year of the great blackout of 1977 when the lights went out on the hottest night of the summer and the city erupted in flames. It was the time that New York City went bankrupt. It was basically, people have called it the coolest year in hell because the city hit rock bottom. And for younger people today who think of New York as this place that you have to be a millionaire to live in, or particularly Manhattan, you kind of have to be a millionaire to live in. It's almost difficult to imagine how different it was in the 1970s, sort of peaking in 1977 in terms of just dysfunction, garbage everywhere, just, you can't believe how crazy the crime was, everything. But it was also one of the peak creative years of modern times in New York, in part for that same reason, because the city was so dysfunctional, it was incredibly cheap. And you could move to New York and you could get an apartment in Manhattan, downtown, East Village, wherever, for $100 a month, which today would be $300 a month.
Right.
So you didn't really have to have any money. You could just go there and just live and do whatever you wanted. And so just zillions of young people poured into the city to do what they wanted to do. There was a lot of music. There was a lot of literature. There was a lot of art. The gay scene was burgeoning. So if you were young and you didn't care about getting mugged or having your apartment broken into, you could have a really, really fantastic time. So my book takes place in that summer, and it begins with a young man, Lucien Lowe, a young poet, is found dead with a heroin needle in his arm. in his apartment in the East Village. And the cops think that it was just a garden variety OD, just an accidental overdose. But his two friends, Finn and Julie, think not. They think that he was murdered, and they set out to sort of begin to investigate his murder. They eventually convince a police detective, Detective Sharon, to help them investigate. And their first suspect, the person that they most suspect as being the killer, is William Burroughs, the writer William Burroughs. And as they wend their way through the story, they constantly bump into real people who I knew back then. I basically, in a weird way, I kind of wrote the book to bring back to life a lot of my friends from that era who had passed away. I didn't really want to write a memoir, too depressing. But I thought, what if I just bring them back and have them solve a murder mystery? And so that is the genesis of it. So they wend their way through trying to solve this mystery, and that's basically what it's about. And so it takes place around CBGBs, which is why it's called the CBGB Conspiracy. I won't give away any spoilers, but it turns out that the whole murder plot does actually have a lot to do with CBGB. Hilly Crystal, the owner of CBGBs, who was a very good friend of mine, is a major character in the book. Jean-Michel Basquiat is a major character in the book, and there's lots of other people, Holly Woodlawn, mafia people, Fat Tony Salerno, Roy Cohn, the evil, horrible Roy Cohn is a significant figure in the book. So it blends real people and as much as I could reconstruct them as to what they were actually like with a completely made up murder mystery. So it's considered to be by publishers, I didn't realize it at the time, but when I started shopping around for publishers, it's considered to be a historical mystery because it blends history. And I hate to think that my own life is now part of, history, that you would consider the era of my 20s to be historical, but it is because it was a long time ago because I'm really old. So that's basically the book.
I mean, even yesterday is history,
Yeah,
true.
yeah. I mean, they call 90s music classic rock, and I feel sad sometimes.
Yeah.
So I haven't been able to finish the book yet, but I'm a few chapters in, and I just want to say that you're so good at painting that picture of that time period, the way that you're name dropping actual places, stores, streets, actual people. And I should tell you, so my dad was born in the Bronx in 1960. And he was all in the city, all in this time period. So I've always heard stories about this time period and all this kind of thing. It's always been a part of my life. So it's really been nice reading the book and feeling like I'm there in these stories that I've always heard about, as I was growing up. So it's been really cool for me as I've been reading into it. So I just wanted to say that. And then, you do such a great job of painting the picture. You really do.
Thank you. I thought of New York in 1977 as a character in the book. Mm-hmm. And that it was just as it was important to nail the major characters and what they were really like, it was important to nail what New York was really like. So I worked very hard at that. And friends of mine who were there then and are still here now seem to think that I, fairly well succeeded in doing that. So that's nice to know.
Yeah,
it's crazy. Way. Oh, sorry, go for it.
Oh, that's all right. It's a great way to memorialize your friends that have passed as well without everything being too traumatic. Like you said, growing up in New York City during that era could be a very traumatic period in a young man's life. But the way you kind of brought them back to life and memorialized them in the book, making experiences more as collages that you really need to pay attention to, look into, as opposed to moments in somebody's life where you're just thinking of feeling sorry for them or bad that they went through certain things. You're just like, whoa, this is exciting. I can't wait to hear more about someone's trauma. But,
Yeah. Well, one thing, people have been urging me to write a memoir. And the problem with writing a memoir, particularly of the 1970s, if you are LGBTQ and you lived in New York, what's going to happen in the 1980s, which is that basically everyone is going to die pretty horribly over a period of about 10 or 15 years. And I just could not see myself. That would be traumatic, trying to bring those people really back to life, knowing that in a couple of years, I'm going to have to start writing about them all getting sick and dying. Whereas just turning it into a murder mystery and just concentrating on that 1 year, which was an incredible year, was a lot more fun. So It is, and I think it is fun. I mean, I tried to make it as fun a read and funny as I could make it. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, like I said, you really paint the picture. I mean, of all the different kinds of people, the Italians, the Jews, the everybody, mixing together in the different cultures and the way that cultures are clashing, which is such a New York City experience, even to this day. Obviously we live in New York. Obviously it's a lot different now than it was back in the day. But that's still something that is consistent, is this, all
Yes.
these cultures all always bumping up elbows, and a certain type of friction that comes with that, but also a certain kind of community that comes with that.
Yeah. And the community around CBGB was really a small community at first. I mean, I started going there, I guess, probably late 74, early 75 was when I first showed up, probably late 74. And it was probably to a couple of hundred people. And that was it. And it was the same people every night. Everybody knew each other.
Right.
And eventually the word got out and more people began coming. And of course, in later years, it became this iconic thing. And now people say, oh, were you actually there? But when you were actually there, it was just like this neighborhood place. And it just happened that some of the people in that little tiny neighborhood were, or turned out to be, Patti Smith and the Talking Heads and the Ramones and Blondie and Tom Verlaine, and the list goes on. And it's like, wow, how did that tiny little infinitesimal scene turn into that? But it did, and now it's this legendary thing.
I know, it's so funny. I remember, so when you're young and you're discovering music that came out before your time, like, it's all new to you, right? Because you had never known it before. So I remember when I was growing up and I was first finding out about, like, Patti Smith and the Ramones and all these people, and I would say to my dad, like, oh, like, have you ever seen these people? Did you ever go to this place, CBGBs? He was just kind of like, yeah, like, like, yeah, I was, whatever. I used to go there. I used to go to the Mud Club or whatever, and it was just, it wasn't that big of a deal. But it seems like it's been romanticized so much.
Yes, it has been romanticized a lot, and that's a cool thing. I mean, I think, honestly, I think that my generation is very lucky that my parents' generation, their music was completely over by the mid-late 60s, when I was in my early teens. My parents' music was, Frank Sinatra and Tony Bennett and people like that, big band stuff. And it was just entirely over. And snotty young people like me and my friends and my brothers would look at our parents and go, I can't believe that you listen to that crap. How come you're not listening to the Rolling Stones and the Who and, all that? And now when I think back, I think, God, I feel sorry for them, because they were still relatively young and their music had just completely been pushed aside by this new thing, which was rock and roll. Whereas my generation, we thought the same thing was going to happen to us. We thought, well, we're doing this now when we're young, but in 20 years, when we're in our 40s, kids, in the future will just look back at that and say, what the hell is that? Because they'll be doing something else. But that didn't actually happen. And I'm still continuously amazed when I walk around. I go into shops and stores and they're playing music in the background, and it's our music from back then, and there's people who are still playing it, and the kids know all the lyrics.
Right.
They're lip syncing to the songs that were hit songs like 50 years before they were born. So I just consider ourselves to be incredibly lucky that it's carried on that way. I don't know why that happened.
I would say more like chosen. It's a really great moment in art and entertainment, a great kind of collage moment, because like you said, with your parents' music, okay, the pop stars of that day were like Frank Sinatra, and the biggest art thing that Frank Sinatra would get would be like a movie deal, or a variety show with the rest of the guys, with Dean and with Sammy. But I feel like in your era, everything artistic came into play with the music. People like Patti Smith, you had also Basquiat, you had Keith Haring, you had poets, you had writers, you didn't just have musicians. So I think it was pretty apropos that in that era, your era, that that's still the era that people look back to kind of want to mimic or be just like, because you guys had so much coming together in terms of artistry as opposed to just musicianship.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is that it was there was a social revolution going on that I'm not sure how much younger people today realize how different the world was, like in the 40s and 50s and early 60s, to how the world became after that, in terms of oppression, in terms of war, in terms of civil rights, in terms of women's rights, in terms of gay rights. It was just the dark ages. And then the 60s came along and barriers began breaking down everywhere. And the music was part of that. It was a really big part of that. I don't think my parents' generation listening to Frank Sinatra and people like that, it was just music that they listened to. But for us, it was a battering ram for social change, and the world did change. I mean, the world that we live in today is largely a product of the 60s and 70s, of the social revolution that happened then. Sometimes today, I feel like we're going backwards in the wrong direction. But for most, for most of my life, it has been moving forward from that moment on, and the music played an integral role in that. And the punk movement, that is very true about. There had been the sort of the mod English thing in the mid 60s. And then there was the sort of hippie thing in the late 60s, early 70s, Woodstock, long hair, drugs, all that stuff. And then there was the glam rock thing, the New York Dolls, that kind of thing in the early 70s. And then punk, that all was that was a stretch of just 10 years. Right. From mod swinging London to the Ramones is 10 years. And there were several huge different sort of social revolutions that happened in those 10 years. And the music was at the very center of each one of those things. You almost think of them as musical movements first and foremost, and social movements later. But really it was primarily social movements, and the music, reflected that. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's I feel like we talk about this all the time. Like there was so much going on during those time periods, and I think that is why the music resonates and continues to resonate throughout time. Whereas opposed to even like, let's say us, like in the past 20 years of pop music since the year 2005, like how much has things really changed? I don't know if it's really changed as much as it did within that time period. I think that's why people still gravitate towards that music and gravitate towards that art, because it does signify a shift in the more or less the mindset of an American, of a typical, or not even American, just like of what the mainstream is.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that things have changed that much. And let's not forget that in 1977, we're talking about punk, because that was what I was primarily involved in, but it was also the beginning of hip hop, and it was also disco, which ultimately evolved into dance music. Right. And they were all going on at the same time. It was almost kind of hard to think. I was very anti-disco. I was a big anti-disco snob in those days. There was a group of gays in downtown New York. We called it Fags Against Facial Hair, because the disco thing was what they called it, the clone look, where everybody had the mustache and the aviator glasses and all that kind of thing. They're dancing at the discos to YMCA and all that, and we thought, I hate that stuff. But now when I listen to it, it's fabulous. I love it. It's really great music. But at the time, that kind of social thing we were not particularly into. And then up in the Bronx, hip hop was happening. And that really turned out to be the one that lasted more than anything else. I mean, punk kind of fell by the wayside, and disco, after the reaction against disco, that fell by the wayside, kind of modulated into dance music. But that dance music was different from disco. Disco was a particular cultural thing. But hip hop just roared right through the decades and is still going on. So, and that all New York City, that's where it all happened, right there, same exact time, a lot of the same people involved. So, it was amazing.
It's crazy. We actually did a podcast about that not too long ago, about just just specifically about the music of New York City and how, like, we were talking about, like, yeah, like the early punk rockers and the early rappers, like there's only so many venues that are going to be open to these types of music. So these people were all around each other. They were exchanging ideas. They were exchanging information in a way that might not be happening today. And I think that's one of the biggest things. It's like, well, it's kind of like you said, New York City really is a character of this in the time. Like, if you're telling the story of you know, this music in this time period, you have to talk about what was going on in the city. You have to talk about, you know, Ford saying "drop dead." You have to talk about there's no money there. The guardian angels put on the subway, and there's crime everywhere. Just like it's all part of the story. You can't separate it.
Yeah. And another thing, and I've heard Patti talk about this recently. When I was young and in that era, music was something that you did together with your friends. It wasn't a consumerist thing where you put on your headphones and you searched around for songs that you particularly personally liked and you created your own little playlist in your head that you would listen to. It was out there. It was on the radio, and everybody listened to the same thing. And that, when you think about what music has meant for people as far back in history as you can go, to the Stone Age, basically, people sitting around campfires, beating drums and singing songs. The whole purpose of music, or not the whole purpose, one of the biggest purposes of music was to bring people together, whether it was communal around your group, your tribe, your family, whether it was religious, where you would go to your religious ceremony and there would be songs that people would sing, whether it was a class thing, the music halls in England in the 19th century versus opera, you know, rich people, high class, they listened to opera together, where people in the music hall listened to music hall. Music was something that everybody did together, and it still very much was. When I was growing up, I mean, in the 60s, we all listened to the same, 77, WABC, and everybody had their own favorites, but we all listened to the same music. All during the 70s, we all listened to the same music. And I worry that today that has fallen by the wayside to a significant extent, and that people think of music as sort of a consumerist thing, that each person can, find their own favorite songs and go through their own playlists and then just listen to the stuff on their headphones kind of thing, rather than all of your friends and everyone that you know and everyone that you might know across the whole country or across the whole civilization all know the same songs because we all listen to the same songs together. I actually think that's one of the reasons why a lot of those talent-y kinds of shows, American Idol-y, kind of The Voice kinds of shows are so popular, because they harken back to a time like everybody knows those songs. And it's hard to find today songs that everybody knows. The genres broke up into so many different genres, and everybody listen to their own genre, and even within their own genre, they listen to their own song. It wasn't like that then, and I think it's missing something. I think it's hard. It's harder to attach yourself to music when it's just the music. You want to attach yourself to the music and to all the people that you listen to the music with. So yeah,
that's crazy. It's kind of like saying more individuals are found when we're all together, when we're all focusing on one topic, as opposed to now where less individuality is found because we're all separate doing our own thing, like you pass by CBGBs now, it's like a leather store, a bank, the same chase,
they sell
that you
our leather jackets.
Yeah, and you'll see that, like, okay, well, here's a Chase. There's going to be a clothing store right next to it. You see that everywhere, pretty much, in New York, right? Okay, well, when I see a Chase, I know I'm going to turn over my shoulder and see a McDonald's, and I know I'm going to see you know what I mean? It's crazy. Yeah, and then we walk around. I who said this? I think it was Jesse James. The tattoo guy.
Yeah.
He was like. He's like, back in the days, having a tattoo used to be an individualistic thing. It used to be a standout thing. And he was like, now you have a tattoo, you're like a dentist. It's like...
Well, when you break all the barriers, it's hard to keep breaking more and more barriers. I mean, there's only so many barriers that there are to break. And when they've kind of all been broken down, where do you go from there? I mean, I think maybe that's what's going on with Trump and with the crazy shit that's going on now, is that people are, the way to break the barriers is to go back to a worse way that it used to be before, and then maybe people can come back and break new barriers again. But yeah, tattoos, I didn't know anybody that had. I knew a couple of people. I used to go to India sometimes in the 70s to go in places like that, and there were people that had little tiny tattoos from India on them, but that was not a thing at all. If it had been, I'd be covered with them right now.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, everyone. Just wanted to take a few seconds to tell you about all of our great new merch options.
We got t-shirts,
Hoodies,
coffee mugs,
hats,
tote bags,
and so much more.
Click the link to view the whole selection. All rights and trademarks reserved to Decide After Dark is the best LLC. If you don't like it, then you can make your own LLC to compete with ours, but you probably won't because you're lazy and a hater. Prove me wrong by purchasing every one of our items at full price. Alternatively, if you're cool, you can hit us up literally whenever for sales and discounts.
I remember as a kid walking, we used to go to a church, of course, on Sundays, early in the morning, and it used to be on the Lower East Side. We would drive out of Brooklyn over the bridge and go to that church. And I remember walking to the church, you would see the strangest people, like some guy with a straight up mohawk, like the biggest one, just walking down the street. And it's so weird, like nowadays, a guy would be embarrassed to walk around with like a mohawk down and sit in the subway car and be like, what? Like, what are you looking at? That could not happen now,
Right. Yeah, it could not happen now. And the city was full of people like that because it was possible to be young and to be really poor and to still make your way in New York. The other thing was that it wasn't Brooklyn. It wasn't the Bronx. It wasn't Queens. It wasn't Staten Island. It was Manhattan, and it was Lower Manhattan. When you think about it, Lower Manhattan, from, say, Houston Street to 14th Street, and, say, Avenue A over to 8th Avenue or so, which was pretty much the parameters of it, is about a square mile. It's like 1 square mile. And that's about the size of like medieval cities like Florence and, places like that, Paris in the Middle Ages, where everyone in that city knew everybody else because you lived right near everybody else. Everybody lived 10 minutes walking from each other. And pretty much the whole downtown scene in New York in the era of CBGBs lived right down there. And so you would walk out your door. It was like being on a college campus. You'd walk out your door, you'd start walking down the First Avenue, Third Avenue, whatever. And oh, hey, how you doing? Oh, look, what are you? So are you going to the thing tonight? We're going to meet around the corner. Oh, well, let's meet at that restaurant on the corner. That, and everybody just mixed together.
Right.
And once it became too expensive, and people went out to Brooklyn, if everybody had been able to go to one particular square mile of Brooklyn and everybody went there, that kind of scene probably would have continued. But that's not what happened. It couldn't happen. Brooklyn is gigantic, and people moved in this neighborhood, that neighborhood. They're in Bushwick, they're in Williamsburg, they're all over the place. And so it became more like Los Angeles in a way, where it's just spread out. And it's extremely difficult to get that critical mass. When you read things like, Patti Smith's Just Friends, I don't know if you've ever read that. It's her first memoir. She just came out with a new memoir, but this was her first one from about maybe 8 or 9 years ago. And she talks about how she had come to New York and she was living with Robert Mapplethorpe, and they were both completely unknown. And they were living in Brooklyn for several years, and nothing was really happening for them. They were incredibly poor. They had no money. They were starving. And then they made the radical decision, even though they had no money, to move into Manhattan and to move into a cheap apartment building across the street from the Chelsea Hotel. And one of the first things that she tells is how she went into one of those Horn and Hardart automats. You remember the automats where you put money in the thing and you get your sandwich out of a little glass thing? And she realized that she didn't have enough money, and she was standing there looking trying to figure out how she could get, 50 cents or whatever for a sandwich. And this gentleman came over and offered to help her, to pay for it for her. And it was Allen Ginsberg. And when I read that, I just thought, yeah, that's exactly what it was like. It was like you would see people like that all over the place. So when that scene began around CBGBs, Blondie lived across the street. William Burroughs lived across the street. People lived just a few blocks away. And so you would just walk over and you would just hang out. And once things became spread out, and they're in Queens, they're in Brooklyn, they're whatever, you lose that cohesiveness, which is something that people said. And that's gentrification. That is, it ends up being a major theme of the book. You probably haven't gotten there yet, but you'll see what happens. That's gentrification, which began really in New York in the 80s. And so this book is pre-gentrification. And it was great. Older people thought it was terrible. They would say to us, you should have been here in the 50s. You could walk the streets at night. You could go into Central Park at 2:00 in the morning, and you didn't worry. We were like, we're never going to go into Central Park. Are you out of your mind? But they were mourning the decline of the city, but we were just reveling in it. It was fun. It was really fun. So, yeah.
You're making me nostalgic for a time that I didn't get to experience.
Exactly. We can only wish, and I'm telling you, we love your era so much. We always talk about it. I mean, we just look at the songs that were on the radio at that time. It's just crazy. I did want to ask you about that. What do you think you now would think about you back then? Could you now live like you back then in the 70s in downtown New York?
I think I could, actually. In fact, I think I would enjoy it. I miss that. I mean, I'm not young anymore, and I wouldn't really want to be super poor anymore. But to live in a scene like that, and to be able to just walk out your door and walk around the corner and see all your friends and everybody's there, and just hang out, and then just walk home in 5 minutes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. I had a feeling you have that vibe, because I remember growing up, like being young in the 90s, still being around people that partied in the 70s. They still had that vibe, like, they were still ready to go out and do things. And another question I wanted to ask you, how did you get your gig as a drummer? Did you just walk in?
Player.
Oh, keyboard player. I'm so sorry. How'd you get your gig as a keyboard player?
I actually I was a classically trained musician, and as a keyboard player, and I didn't want to become a classical musician. I wanted to become a rock and roll musician. And in those days, the place to do that was New York City. So I just moved to New York City. I got a job in the Strand bookstore for 6 months until I was fired for reading too many books. Every time Mr. Bass would come around the corner, Rotello, what are you reading? I'm supposed to be reading. You're supposed to be putting the books on the shelves, goddammit. And he fired me. But I was an arranger, because I was classically trained, and most of my friends that were rock and roll people were not classically trained. So I could write arrangements, and I could do lead sheets, and I could do all that kind of thing. So I put an ad in the Village Voice to advertise there was a little column in the classifieds for musical services kind of thing, and I put my ad in there, and people began calling me up, and I just began meeting everybody, and people began hiring me to do that. In fact, Patti Smith hired me when Radio Ethiopia came out, which was her second album. Warner Brothers decided to do those song books that you can buy where you can play the songs on the piano and that kind of thing. They decided to do one for Patti's first 2 albums, and she didn't want it to just come out of the Warner Brothers factory. It would just be some kid sitting in a cubicle just making it up. She wanted some control over it. So she hired me to do the songbook, to write the piano transcriptions in the songbook. So I did lots of stuff like that. And through meeting people like that, I just began getting gigs, and then I started starting my own bands. My first big one, which was Brenda and the Real Tones. And then I began producing live shows because I had the ability to write arrangements. So I could get a horn section, and I could get a rhythm section, and we could do a whole thing. And so those became the Downtown Divas, the Downtown Dukes and Divas shows in the mid 80s at the Limelight and the Palladium and places like that, which became enormously popular, and everybody in New York was in those shows. And so I just had the ability to do that. So but anybody could play at CBGBs. I mean, anybody could play at CBGBs. They had 4 or 5 bands a night. And if you were breathing and you could, you had a guitar, you had a drum, you had whatever you had, Hilly would book you at least once just to see what it was all about. And if you got 4 or 5 bands a night, basically, I think, was CB's open 7 nights a week? I think it was, actually. There was room for everybody. So It was not hard to break into the scene. And it wasn't just CB's. I concentrate this book mostly on CBGB's, but Max's Kansas City was sort of the other pole. It was Max's and CB's were the 2 places that people played. And actually, Max's had a much longer pedigree because Max's went back to the 60s with Andy Warhol. Before it was a rock club, it was just a restaurant that had a back room that Warhol and his entourage took over, and it became the place to be in 65, 6, 7, 8, 9. So Max's really went back way longer than CB's. And there were those two places, and then because they were successful, there were a lot of other places to play too. The clubs began opening all over downtown: the China Club and the Cat Club and the Mud Club, and there were just clubs all over the place. So it was, if you were a working musician and you were trying to, I mean, you didn't make much money. The idea always was to get a record contract. You know, you're putting in your time in your band in hopes that you will hit it big, like Tom Verlaine in television, or like the Ramones, or like Blondie. But you could play. It was not hard to play if you had anything going on at all. So that was a fun aspect of it. And I don't know, I mean, is it like that now? Are there lots of places to play?
Well, I wanted to go back to this because it's kind of going back to what you were saying before about how everything being so close together, there was such a strong community aspect of it. And that goes into why the music was so powerful also, is because everyone's together, there's the community aspect. And then as you were talking, things started to get spread out more. And that's kind of where, the New York that we're coming up in. And it's so interesting because it is so much harder when, you might meet somebody at a show in Manhattan, and then you want to go to their next show, and they're like, "Oh yeah, come see me play in the Bronx," and it's like, "Oh, we're in like Flatbush," like, and you might not have like people outside of New York City might not understand like how far that really is, but it's like that's not easy to just go to all these other shows in Queens and in the Bronx and everything. Like it does make so much more sense to everybody to be that connected. So I feel like there are places that you can play everywhere, but it's almost like there's so much and it's so spread out that it's hard to really get into a scene unless you're talking about like a specific neighborhood scene. Like we could know everybody in Bushwick, like we kind of do, but then you go into even like the West Village and it's like nobody's ever heard of you. You know what I mean? So it's just, we're literally living now what you were describing as the breakup of the scene. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. It's like what you're talking about with New York now is like what Los Angeles has always been like. I just moved. I lived there for 25 years. I lived in New York for 25 years and then LA for 25 years. And I was in a cover band, which is a funny story. So when I get to LA, I wasn't doing music anymore. I was now TV producer, but I still played music and I wanted to play, and I just didn't really know how to do that. And a friend of mine from, who had lived in New York and had moved to Nashville said, well, why don't you just join a cover band? You're a good keyboard player. That they would love to have you, I'm sure, in a cover band. And I was like, what is that? Like, after 25 years in Manhattan, I didn't really know what a cover band you mean. I said, oh, you mean it's a band? And they play they play cover songs. Oh, is that a thing? Do people have that? Because we didn't have that in Manhattan. Right. It was my whole time that I lived there was all originals. If you didn't play originals, there were cover bands out in New Jersey or, in Hoboken or, wherever, but there were not any that I knew of in New York. But that thing of the scene, when I got in the cover band, none of my friends would come hear me play because it was always in Studio City. And then the next weekend it would be down in the South Bay. And then the next weekend it would be up in Chatsworth. These are places that are, 40 minutes away, 25 minutes away, driving on freeways. Like, who's going to do that, Whereas when everybody's together, you just walk out your door, you walk down the street, you're there. So it's very important to have that. I think that people have lost that, and people have tried to recreate that electronically by creating sort of electronic communities on the internet, and you've got your scene on the internet and all that stuff. But and that's good. I mean, they should try to do that. If they're living all spread out, then you got to do something, and that we now have that technology. But it's not even remotely the same. You're not having sex with each other. You're not fighting with each other. You're not having meals with each other. You're not switching partners with each other. You're not just casually hanging out because there's nothing to do, so we're just hanging out together.
Right.
It's a very purposeful thing. So it's good, and people should do it, but it's not the same. And so I, again, consider myself very lucky. And that's what I was trying to bring back in the CBGB Conspiracy, because as you notice in that book, people are constantly running into each other, and a lot of the serendipity that happens around the crime and around the attempt to solve the crime happened because so-and-so was walking down the Bowery and, oh, there's Jean-Michel Basquiat across the street. Let's go ask him, and the next thing you know, he's helping to do something. And then suddenly Allen Ginsberg shows up, and then you're in William Burroughs' loft, which is right, 2 blocks away from Blondie's loft. And then the blackout happens and everybody runs over to CBGB's because it's just up the street. And there's a big crowd on the street outside. And, that kind of thing. The blackout, by the way, I love the blackout was really crazy. That was crazy when it actually happened. And I really enjoyed bringing that back to life in the book because that was a wild ride. And do you guys know the history of the connection between the blackout and hip hop?
Yes, we were just talking about that like an episode or two ago.
Yeah.
Right? That's crazy. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. It's crazy.
For those
How
that don't
things
know,
are supposed to happen
Sorry, this is what you were just talking about. You were just talking about how the internet is not the same. This is a perfect example of that. Sorry, were you going to say something?
But the hip hop kids didn't have the money to buy the turntables and the equipment, and that was what was holding people back. Like they knew what they wanted to do, they had the talent to do it, but you need a couple of $1,000s, and kids in the Bronx didn't have and then suddenly the blackout happened. Break open the windows, run in, grab all the stuff that you need, and within just weeks, there was this explosion of creativity it's true, it was using stolen stuff. I hope that the owners of the stores got their insurance money or whatever.
Right.
But it wouldn't have happened without that, which is another thing, a big thing about class and race and how people were disadvantaged by being poor and by being people of color and did not have the money to do their stuff. But the blackout, for a lot of people, it solved that problem.
Right? That's crazy. Okay. I wanted to ask you just a creative question. I was going to ask it about the first and the last chapter of your book. I have not read the last chapter, but if you were to score your chapters with either music or any type of artwork, like a Basquiat picture or something like that, but if you were to score your chapters, what songs from that era would you use to score them?
Well, I would use the bands that are in the book. So, I mean, first and foremost would be Patti Smith.
Okay.
And the
what song though? Like,
Jesus died for somebody's sins, but not mine. And also Redondo Beach, and I mean, just that whole album, everything. And she's done that album. 10 years ago, she did the whole thing on the 40th anniversary, and then this year she did the entire album again.
I saw her recently at a benefit concert last year. Jackson Browne was there too, and Michael Stipe. I was pretty excited.
Yeah. So I would do Horses and Radio Ethiopia. I would do Marquee Moon.
Okay. We just heard that.
And Tom Verlaine. I would do early Blondie, rip her to shreds kind of thing. And the thing in the book, in the original version of the book, I used a lot of song lyrics. And you'll notice that there aren't any song lyrics now in the book. I paraphrase them because it's too expensive. And the publisher was like, it's going to cost $1 million.
Yep.
But what I did was, and the book actually ends with Jesus died for somebody's sins, but not mine. One of the old Italian ladies in the basement. I won't tell you what happens at the end, but the crime is solved. Everything is okay. And they're underneath the CBGB theater, which was not CBGB's, but was this other place that the book is sort of based upon Hilly trying to do that. And suddenly the crowd begins roaring. and she hears this roar upstairs, and then she hears these piano chords, and then she hears this girl's voice. And the way I write it, something like, she hears this girl's voice, beautiful, like a Madonna, like church, singing something about Jesus dying for somebody's sins, but not hers. And the old woman sits there and goes, "You got that right, sister." End of book. So that would definitely be, so it would be Blondie, it would be television, it would be the Ramones, it would be Patti Smith, it would be the bands that are mentioned in the book.
Yeah, I like the particular songs that you picked out because I have heard those songs before. And it's like I'm kind of like reading what I read in the first chapter, but hearing those songs in the background is really cool as well.
I had them on when I was writing the book a lot.
Yeah.
Another thing that I had, there's a documentary. I used to make a lot of documentaries for VH1, and remember all those like behind the music kinds of documentaries? Sure. They used to be all over the place. They don't make them anymore, but they did when I first started in television in the late 90s, early 2000s. And somebody for VH1 made a documentary called 1977, The Coolest Year in Hell. And it was a documentary about New York in 1977 that centered around the blackout and the bankruptcy of New York and the Son of Sam and CBGBs and the punk explosion and the hip hop explosion. It's a 2-hour-long documentary, and it's full wall-to-wall visuals, archival footage of New York from 1977. And I had that going in the corner like all the time. If I ever needed a refresher of like, what is, I needed some inspiration. Like, what was it? What were we wearing? What did it look like? What did the cars look like? What were we drinking or eating or whatever? I would just look over in the corner and look at oh yeah, right. Of course. I remember that. So that was a cool thing. If anybody wants to watch that, you can see it. I think it's on YouTube for free. But it's fun. Yeah,
absolutely. I thought of this when you were talking about your story about finding out what a cover band is. So this came into my brain when you were saying that. And you were talking about how like your parents' music didn't have the same kind of staying power as the music that you were around did. Do you think a big reason for that is that the fact that these people in your generation were actually writing the songs and creating the songs versus the people like the Sinatras? They didn't write a lot of those songs. A lot of those songs are written for them, or they're doing standards, or they have songwriters working for them.
Tin Pan Alley.
Yeah, exactly. Do you think that is the biggest thing? Because obviously, you could be a great singer singing somebody else's song, but if it's actually something that you created, that you wrote, it's going to have a little bit more of a different resonance that might hit people, decades going into the future. You think that has a lot to do with it?
Absolutely, has a lot to do with it, and what the lyrics that they were writing were about. Because with Frank Sinatra, it was like moon, June, spoon kind of stuff. They were love songs, and they were just the same kinds of pretty little songs that people have been writing for 150 years. And when the Beatles and the Stones and the Who and the British Invasion and all of that came along, Bob Dylan, gigantic influence on everybody, writing songs that meant something to that generation, that spoke to what was actually happening then, it just blew everything else away. And it came to seem inauthentic if you didn't write your own songs. There were some people who didn't. And I remember people would talk about the difference between, say, Joni Mitchell and Judy Collins. Joni Mitchell wrote all of her own songs. And Judy Collins, who's a wonderful artist and has a fabulous voice and fabulous taste in choosing other people's songs, but she very rarely wrote her own songs, and some people wouldn't listen to her. They were like, well, that's not authentic. She's not saying anything. She's just some songwriter wrote a song and she's just singing a song that somebody else wrote, Whereas Joni Mitchell, every word out of her mouth was coming directly from the heart. So yes, so that was part of it. But the other big part of it was the baby boom. Our parents' generation was just swamped by us. There were like 5 times as many of us that there were of them. And the radio stations and the record companies wanted listeners for the radio stations, and they wanted to sell records for the record companies. And you were not going to do that catering to this relatively small cohort of people in their 30s and 40s when there was this gigantic cohort of millions and millions of kids in their teens and 20s that wanted to rock and roll. So they just stopped making that kind of music. It just went out of style, and it never really came back.
Wow, so it's almost like a rare time when the commercial and the artistic endeavors kind of lined up then. You know what I mean? Because you wouldn't usually think of the music industry, like of what they're trying to pump out, the people they're trying to reach being necessarily more artistic. But if that's what the people were buying and that's what people were into, then they would have the financial incentive to also do that. I never really thought about that.
Yeah, they had a huge financial incentive to do that. But they also had, and I know that people, in later years, people really complained about this, and record companies became sort of like a dirty word because they were exploitive and they took so much of the profits from people and all that stuff. But when you think about the situation now, where there are no gatekeepers and just anybody can put a song on Spotify, and I read somewhere on Rick Beato or some podcast that there's something like 200,000 songs get dropped every day on Spotify. And like, how do you find when there's 200,000 songs a day? And now I think with AI and with Suno 5.0, it's probably even more than that. You know,
millions.
Having gatekeepers was a good thing. I mean, I call me old-fashioned, but having just a set number of record companies, because those people, they were mostly young people. You think of record companies as these old, smoking cigars. These like, they don't know what's going on. But most of the A&R people were our age too. And they knew what was good, and they were trained to what was good, and they were trained to look for acts and look for bands, look for singers, songwriters, whatever, who spoke to them and would therefore then speak to the public. Mm-hmm. And I think when you look at the history of popular music in America in those decades, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, like continuing right up to the beginning of this century, I think they did a really good job. I think that we had really, really good music. And because there were gatekeepers, radio stations and record companies, everybody was kind of almost forced to listen to the same music, which then gave that music even more meaning because all your friends, it's that old thing, they're playing our song, Mm-hmm. I went to high school. Yeah, I went to my high school reunion not long ago, and half the time at the reunion we were talking about music. Remember this song? Remember when we were there? Remember? Oh God, I love that so much. Remember staying up late listening to this radio show or whatever? Like that was a huge, huge part of our experience of being high school kids in the '60s. I graduated from high school in 1970. It was a huge part of our experience, and I mean, do kids have that experience today? Do kids in like high school, are they all listening to the same? I know, certain big stars, Taylor Swift and Britney Spears and, some of the big acts people do know. But is that a common thing today?
I think, well, neither of us, I mean, we've both been out of high school for a little bit, but I can only speak for, when I was there. I do think that there are more niche kind of, I don't want to say markets, if you will. It sounds so corporate, but there's more niche things going on. And when you find other people in that same niche, you do feel a very strong sense of community, especially because things are so more spread out. So it's like, you only maybe 1 in a million people might know this song. So if you meet somebody else that knows this song, you're like, oh my God, you're my person. And then, you know what I mean? And then you start sharing music with each other. So I do think that's happening. I think it's happening on a smaller scale in different places, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's like the groups converge through like almost like gaming. They're all online playing Call of Duty, and certain songs come on the Call of Duty game or the GTA game, and they become music heads together in that little pocket because they found themselves through gaming. But it's not like we're just walking down the hallway in class or, that song is on the radio. We all watch that video premiere at 8:00 on MTV. It's not like that anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys remember. You're old enough to remember the beginning of MTV, or you're not old enough?
Not
to
the beginning of MTV, but definitely
yeah.
some good pockets. Yeah,
because that was another big one. Like that was not. CBGB Conspiracy is 77. MTV was, I guess, early 80s, 82 or 80. I forget what year it debuted, but things had started to drift apart, and the creep of the genres had really started to happen, and there were lots of genres, and music was just dividing up. And then MTV happened, and just wham, like everybody just came right back to one. It became like the big radio stations like WABC or whatever for quite a number of years in the 80s. And think of the stars that churned out from Madonna on down. I mean, just like one after another, these gigantic acts, and everybody knew those songs and everybody knew those lyrics and those bands. So that was probably the last gasp of that communal thing where everyone listens to the same music. But it was fun. I loved MTV when that came out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a give and a take.
When it was good, it was good.
It's definitely a give and a take of like what you were saying of, well, it's something that Steve and I talk about all the time, because obviously this is the era that we're growing up in. This is the era that we're making music in. And we were like, is it better now or was it better then? Because at least back then you knew, okay, I'm going to play as much as I can in this 1 square mile radius. Hopefully I get a record deal. There was like a more set path of like how to do it. Versus now anyone can put out music, but everybody's kind of on their own. Like you got to figure it out. Like, you know what I mean? There's really no set path. So everybody has the opportunity to possibly do well, but the chances of it actually are happening, not so much. But on the other hand, I feel like there's more people in the middle as opposed to like on the top, meaning like if you have 1,000 fans that, between, shows and the internet and merch or whatever, if you have 1,000 fans that will give you $100 over the course of a year to be, for whatever item, that's $100,000. And you could just have your community of 1,000 people that you cater to. You don't care about anybody else. You make those people feel connected to you, and you can make a living off of that. So it's like one of those things we already talked about. I'm like, I don't really know if it is better or if it's just different or if things just get spread out and that's just is what it is, Right.
Well, it's just different. I mean, each one has its own things. The problem back then was that because they were gatekeepers, if you didn't pass muster with the gatekeeper, you didn't have a career. There was only room. They felt that there was only room for so many acts. The public can only absorb so much popular music. You cannot have 10,000 acts that are signed to labels and are trying to get airplay. It has to be limited. So we have to find the very best ones as best we can, and then that's it. And if you're outside of that, you can keep knocking on the door and trying to get in. But if you don't get in, that's it. It was also very expensive to make records in those days. There was nothing, what you have today with, Logic and Pro Tools and GarageBand, all these different things. You can just go in your bedroom and you can make a very professional. And now with Suno, like, oh my God, you can make
crazy,
unbelievably professional sounding stuff. In those days, it cost thousands of dollars just to make a single little demo tape.
Yeah.
So there was the thing of gatekeepers was great because it kept everything very focused, but it was not great. So it's better today for the democratic aspect of music that anybody can make music today. But it's worse because very few people even know where to find your music if you do make it. You can do great stuff. People are constantly turning me on to just incredible stuff.
Yeah.
Like somebody will call me and say, "Oh, here's a link. You got to go listen to this song." And I'll go, "Oh my God, that is fantastic. What's happening with that band?" And they'll go, "Nothing. I mean, look at the number of likes. They have 7 likes. There's like nobody knows who they are, and nobody's ever going to know who they are unless they get picked up by an influencer, and they get onto a video game, and they become the music on a video game, and then people suddenly, and that's not a good way to break new acts. Somebody choosing songs to be playing in the background when they're explaining makeup tips and they're doing their influencer thing, or somebody picking a song because it goes really well with this particular video game works. It'll get it out there. People will hear your song, but it's not the same as an A&R person and people at record labels that are really listening and really thinking, and is this really good? Do these people have legs? Will they be able to continue to produce year after year? That kind of thing. I think that was a better system in general. But they're just different. It's just a different world that we live in now.
Yeah.
And the CBGB conspiracy, I bring you back to the old.
Thank God.
Oh, that was a good circle back there. That was a good callback. Guys, check out the book. It's amazing. I can't wait to finish it. Thank you so much, Gabriel, for being here. We appreciate you. Siva, do you have any other questions before we wrap up that you want to ask?
No, I just wanted to thank you so much. I always got a question. Okay, what's your, man, I know you're going to have to think hard, and I'm sorry. What's your favorite song of 1977?
Oh, my favorite song of 1977. God, I have to even remember what were the songs. You would think that I would know all the songs of 1977, having just written a book about 1977, but
There's a lot of songs.
A lot of the songs in the CBGB Conspiracy are also from 75, from 76. I didn't do anything from later. I had a cutoff.
There's some pop ones. We got like rock ones. You got Jungle Love by Steve Miller. You got Point of No Return. You got Sex Pistols, who are on the charts. You got What's Your Name by Lynyrd Skynyrd, Cat Scratch Fever. There's so many songs. Hotel California was still on the charts, but I knew I knew I was gonna put you on the spot with that, but yeah.
I can't just think. I'm really bad about thinking stuff like that off the top of my head. But
that's why it was such a great year.
Speaking of Hotel California, it was like that was what Hotel California and groups like that were what punk was reacting against. Rock had really become this gigantic, super professional, stadium-oriented, heavily produced stuff, and people wanted to strip it back down and to go back to the roots of what it originally was, like Buddy Holly. People don't realize often, I think, that the Ramones were aping the Beach Boys, like early Beach Boys.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Their songs were Beach Boys songs, faster and simpler, but that's what they were doing. And so those big Emerson, Lake and Palmer and the Eagles and all those big stadium things were what people were trying to get away from. And today, when I think about that, one thing that sort of bothers me about my own attitude back then is, and I think that people still do this today, is that your music and your musical taste, at least for us in those days, was a signifier of how cool you were. And you almost sort of used music and your musical taste as a weapon. It was like when I was talking before about disco and Fags Against Facial Hair. We put disco down, and we put California rock, country rock down, because we were the cool kids who whatever. And at the end of the day, I don't think that that's a healthy thing to do with music. Music is to bring people together, not to push them apart and to make me feel superior to you because I have better taste in music than you do.
Right.
And that's what we were doing. So in that vein, I didn't like Hotel California because I had better taste than those people that loved it. But now when I listen to it, it's a very beautiful song,
Yeah.
So yeah,
that's a really sorry. I was going to say that's a really interesting point. I'm glad you brought it back to the disco thing, because I was thinking about that too. Even with me, I grew up playing in punk rock bands, and I was like, oh, I don't want to listen to anything else. Punk rock is cool, blah 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 blah. Maybe similar to what you were feeling about disco. Like, I don't want to listen to that shit, blah 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 blah. But now, as I've gotten a little older, and I can go back and I can still listen to, Eagles and be like, this is good. And I can listen to Frank Sinatra and I'd be like, this is good. Like, good music is good music. We don't have to put up those barriers. But I think that's really just something that comes with age and maturity. I feel like, I think most young people, they want to fit in with their crew. They want to fit in with, whatever clique they're in. But I think as you get older, you realize that, the world has more to offer than just these specific things that you're into, that there is a broader range to enjoy.
I hope so. I hope that people do that. I remember being really so surprised. I worshiped David Johansen back in the early days from the New York Dolls. And I thought, he was the coolest guy, and I was very proud to call him my friend. And when we became friends, I remember being absolutely shocked that he was into grand opera. He knew all the operas. He had a gigantic opera record collection. He would finish a show with the Dolls, where they were like the coolest thing going, and then he would go home and put his headphones on and listen to Aida or Carmen. And I was like, dude, that's so uncool. And then I thought, oh no, it's the ultimate cool. It's the coolest thing ever, because he could be both the one of the progenitors of punk rock and also somebody who knew his way around the Metropolitan Opera House. What's cooler than that?
That's
So,
It was so cool that he didn't care if somebody else didn't like what they were listening to. That's really what it comes back to. Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
definitely cool. Didn't he remake Feeling Hot, Hot, Hot?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he did that.
Yeah.
And I
He was
only
a
know him
big
as
hit.
that. And then, of course, I loved Scrooge, the movie growing up. So he's the cab
Right.
driver. He's the ghost of Christmas Past. So it's crazy how I saw him on a different part of his
Right.
life. And then my uncle, who was into like Adam Ant, Frank Zappa, New York Dolls, my uncle had to actually tell me, like, that guy used to be super cool when we were young. He was like this whole big punk rocker. And I was like, really? It's
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah, what art does.
The two bands, the most influential bands, were the Velvet Underground, which were Lou Reed in the '60s with Nico, and the New York Dolls. Neither of them are considered to be punk bands because they were both before the punk era, but they were, along with the MC5 and some Detroit bands as well, had a big influence. But it was really the Velvet Underground and the New York Dolls, and David Johansen was the New York Dolls. It was a raucous, raw thing. Nobody had ever seen anything like it. And if you go down the list of Tom Verlaine and Richard Hell, and just go down the list of the people that started punk, all of them will say that the New York Dolls and David Johansen were their number one inspiration. Like, that's what made them decide that they wanted, and that they could do music too, because the New York Dolls couldn't really play that well, right? They were not that good, but they had the energy, they had the drive, and they made it happen.
That's so wild.
That's one of the most interesting things about going back and listening to music from the past, because you realize that a genre it doesn't really exist in a way. It's just kind of a label that somebody puts on, because you can listen to like Iggy in the Stooges and be like, oh, well, this is clearly punk rock, but like, oh, this was before punk rock. And like, same with, the Velvet Underground. I remember when I was young and I was discovering all this music, I remember hearing the Velvet Underground and I'd be like, this is like every indie rock band that I know that's out now is clearly from this. Like, this is, it's not even hard to make that connection at all.
Yeah.
But, it was from so long. It was before, indie rock. It was just rock and roll. But when you hear it now, it's very clear.
Yeah, absolutely. That's true. The label was just something that somebody at a magazine, at Punk Magazine, came up with. Let's give a name to what's going on at CBGBs and let's call it punk. And that label has stuck. But that's very limiting. It was much broader than that, and it started much earlier than that. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. Guys, the CBGB Conspiracy, go get it. Go check it out. It's awesome. Thank you, Gabriel, so much for being here. This has been Music Maniacs Beside After Dark. We love you. We appreciate you. And we'll see you soon.